Live from Brussels and Leuven, it's ZN Live.
ZN Live.
Today, your usual host, Phil, is not here. He's actually enjoying the waves in Tanzania, but I'm very happy to be hosting ZN Live with Evie for the 372nd episode. And we have with us today, Joao Sousa. Joao is a strategic communication advisor and managing director at the European Office of Public Affairs Council. He has 18 years of experience in communications. He's collaborated with national institutions, international organizations, and NGOs. We're very happy to have you here today with us. His work spans the globe from Western Balkans, Africa, Latin America, and he's been focusing a lot on issues related to peace, development, and public governance. Joao, you came last week back from a conference in the US. So I would love to hear more about how that went and maybe what are some of the transatlantic trends that you were able to identify for public affairs and communication on that front.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. First of all, Marcella and Evilenia, the ZN team, for having me. And to Philip as well. I hope he's having fun in Tanzania. I think I was there about 10 years ago or so. So whether it's in Zanzibar or enjoying safari somewhere, I hope he's having fun. So back to other latitudes. And indeed, so as you said, perhaps a very brief introduction because you said everything. But indeed, I'm Joao. I'm here based in Brussels. I had the Public Affairs Council, the European Office, and our global practice. And last week, I had the opportunity and privilege, really, to be with our US team and our US members for the board meetings, which happened about twice per year. And it's really, I find, an interesting opportunity to be in touch with a public affairs community in the US and global as well. And see a little bit about, compare notes, talk to people, see what's on their minds, what's worrying them, what are the opportunities they're seeing. One thing we talked a lot about was inevitably the election. I mean, this is election year everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but in more than half, 50% of the world. A lot of countries are going to vote. Here in Europe. We have the European elections, and 7 or 8 or 9 countries also going to vote. The US is going to vote as well, and that's going to have a big impact, not just there, but for us here in Europe and beyond as well. There was obviously a lot of talk about the elections, about the candidates, potential candidates, who is going to be or not a candidate. I think things are pretty clear by now. And so there is obviously people are thinking about what life will be like and what business will be like after the elections. In the run up to the elections, I think one thing people are looking at is negative partisanship, the polarization of the public discourse, of the political discourse between the two parties there, and between very different public opinions. So I think that's something business is looking at, because it does have a broader impact on not just politics, but also the way people live, how companies may or may not be impacted by the narrative, by what happens in politics, and by their own involvement in different political / social issues. So I think companies and businesses are looking at that very attentively. When I speak to my US colleagues, I'm always fascinated by how good they are at a number of things. One of them is digital and grassroots, and they're really, really good at doing that, at involving citizens or constituents in the policy-making process. That's something that here in Europe we don't do so much of. There isn't such a big tradition of writing to your constituents, writing to your members of the European Parliament. But in the US, they do that very well. They have, very easy ways, very accessible and engaging ways to encourage that. Applications, websites, messages, text messages. So it's really easy for people to get involved. And I think they do that really well. Another thing I think they are very, very good at, and I think this is perhaps a lesson for us here in Europe in terms of trying to adopt this new mindset, is thinking about, how communication and public affairs can contribute to the business, right? What's the contribution to the bottom line? How can I measure the impact of my public affairs work, of my communication work? How can I translate that? How can I quantify that? And how can I translate that? If not in dollars and cents, in euros and cents, or at least trying to have a more exact approach to it and try to put a value on it. I think it's something that in the end is going to help the profession if we as communicators and public affairs practitioners are able to kind of quantify what we do and communicate that value and that impact internally. So, just a few ideas that were floated around. And now back to Brussels. Other challenges are ahead, but maybe we can talk about those a little bit in a bit.
Definitely. And actually, I think, like from the start of the discussion and your, like introduction into, like the transatlantic trends, I think what came to my mind directly was regarding the EU elections, because, I mean, we mentioned, like that there are a lot of elections going, like on this year around the globe, and, like there are many results at stake. But when it comes to the EU elections, and from your perspective as a communicator, what strategies would you suggest to employ or focus on to ensure effective communication and engagement with stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had cracked that nut, I would probably be in Tanzania right now, or in Zanzibar, or in some paradise islands. I mean, it's a very important question, and it's perhaps a question that doesn't have an exact answer. I mean, we're not working in mathematical sciences. Communication is a social science. It deals with humans, and humans are complex, and so the communication process is something you can never fully plan for. You have your strategy, but then, as I think Mike Tyson said, a strategy is great until you get punched in the mouth, and then things follow a different direction. I mean, about the EU elections, I think we're all kind of following we're following the trends, we're following the reports and the news and the polls that tell us in which direction, more or less, the parliament is going. What are the voting trends? And I think beyond the communication scope of the answer, I think we should be prepared for the fact that the parliament is going to be different. And the likelihood is that there will be members of the European Parliament who do not really share the same views about Europe and about some very fundamental things here in Europe than what has been the case so far. And so I think the first question is, how can we engage with people who, in many respects, have different views from us, sometimes even opposite views from us? Are companies willing to engage? And if so, and I do believe that the answer tends to be yes, how to engage, right? So Brussels is a capital of negotiation, is a capital of give and take. And that give and take, despite its ups and downs, as always, I think, made things better. Even if sometimes the politics of things is not easy, even if sometimes in national capitals the environment is more tense or more marked by a specific political party. When it comes to Brussels, it's always about compromise. It's always about negotiation. And so I think us as communicators or as public affairs professionals have especially the responsibility to sort of to bring the communication flag, the tolerance, the impartiality flag, and really try to see, okay, this is happening. How can we still work out the best for our politics, for our democracies, for our companies, for our businesses, which are very important, obviously. And so I think that's going to be definitely a challenge. But I think everything starts by putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, who no matter what was elected. So there are constituents who voted for that person or for that party. And so if nothing else, for that reason, they deserve to have their place there, and we deserve to have a negotiation with everyone.
Mm-hmm. No, of course.
Yeah, I think obviously this is a topic close to heart to everyone that we're talking about, and it's going to have a huge impact in the coming months. It's not, of course, about June, but everything else that happens afterwards. And I think it was really interesting what you said about Brussels, that it's a city of negotiation. I think this was really well echoed in one of the recent ZN Lives that we had with One Brew, One Vote. It's an initiative also that we are fully supporting as well, but there's just so much diversity in the city, and I think the fact that so many different nationalities and cultures are brought in together begs the question and actually incentivizes this whole narrative of making sure that we can come to a consensus, to a compromise for the greater good. And speaking actually of different cultures and different different cultures, so to speak. You also have a very diverse and rich background, as we already mentioned. What do you think are kind of some of the most significant challenges when it comes to communicating across different cultures and regions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, a lot of things can go wrong in communication in general, and in particular when you are communicating with people or for people who come from a different background. I mean, already language can be one of the barriers, and is certainly one of the barriers. But more broadly, there is, a common. It's about common perceptions, common symbols, common traditions, and a common interpretation of reality. So I always found, and as you mentioned, that I did a few things in previous lives, especially when it comes to communicating, EU projects or international institutions or government initiatives. I did quite a bit of engagement with non-EU stakeholders and non-EU audiences, and I always find it super helpful to have someone or more people who are part of your team and who are really embedded in that culture, either because they are nationals of that culture and speak the language, or they've been living there for a long time. It really just helps you kind of, you do have a strategy, and it's great to have one, but afterwards, when it comes to actually finding out what your interlocutor or what your stakeholder or what your audience is thinking and expecting, then it's really important to have someone who can act, kind of like the messenger or the interpreter or the decoder or of the signals, and help pass on the message as well. So, in the end, it's all about communication, is all about the audience, is all about understanding what your audience, understanding your stakeholders, and really finding what are those activities or those tools or those messages that are going to resonate, and truly trying to put yourself in their shoes. Which is why, sometimes we have a conversation about social media and about which channels should we be on and we should not be on. And here I'm pivoting to a completely different topic. So sorry if I go a little bit off topic here, but it's connected to what I was just saying. If your audience is there, then you should be there too. It makes sense that you're there. But if you're not there, if your audience is not there, then it's perhaps pointless for you to be in certain social media channels out of vanity, or just because your management thinks it's a great idea and they heard it or read it somewhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by the way, I really also love your whole argument about diversity. I think at ZN as well, we're a very diverse company. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many nationalities we actually currently have, but it's a lot. I want to say 50, but don't quote me on that.
Maybe we should count it for Europe Day, but I mean, it's like we expand maybe beyond Europe as well. So I don't know, if it makes sense, but maybe we should do it, just to have the facts nailed down. By the way, Anto is joining us today. Hey, hello, Anto. Our creative director is here with us, and he left a comment. So yeah, we just wanted to acknowledge it. Marcela, I think that, since Joao spoke about trends, maybe it's nice to kind of like dive into that discussion. I think it's been, very much interesting and at heart for us in the past months. So why don't you go ahead and dive into it?
Absolutely. And I think you are right. Like, you have to be where your audience is. Channel selection is important. I think for us at the 10, we've always been kind of channel agnostic as well, because I think the strategy and the message is important, and you shouldn't just select the channel just because you think that, this is the easiest way to go or this is the place to be, but also consider how the landscape is evolving and changing. And I think, we cannot not talk about X, as we've already discussed. There's been a lot of reputational challenges around this platform. So, of course, we also want to hear what you think about it. And actually, we did this recent research. We've had different insights that we're including actually in our Zeitgeist newsletter as well, to kind of see and understand how the online behavior, especially of the institutional stakeholders and also our EU influencers, might be changing. Are they staying on X? Are they going somewhere else? Threads also now is, of course, available in Europe. So we wanted to see, are they embracing this platform? Are they trying to maybe eye out some new alternatives? But surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, we saw that the Commission, MEPs, but also EU influencers are still very much present on X. They are maybe tapping a bit to Threads, but they are really very much actively still using X as their go-to platform to share their positions and to reach their constituents, which I'm not sure is necessarily the right thing to do. But of course, I also want to hear from your side, and also to see how maybe your clients are also reacting to this phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, I like your expression of being channel agnostic. That's a good one. About X, where is it going? I think I won't deviate a lot from your research. I tend to agree with what you said. I think the reality seems to be that Twitter is losing at more or less a higher or slower rate, but it is losing users. I read somewhere recently that part of the Twitter audience is moving to Instagram or to TikTok, especially among the younger voters. And by the way, we're seeing that quite a bit now in the run up to the EU elections, where younger voters are being more and more persuaded to vote in a certain direction and to engage in the political process through TikTok. And so the political parties that have a TikTok presence are actually being more successful than the others at capturing these young votes. So I think the world is changing, and I don't have the crystal ball to see where Twitter is heading, but it does feel like the times are ripe for a new platform to come and take over and be the new excitement, the focus of our excitement, or perhaps for others, as it's been the case so far, to take a bit from Twitter. I remember a few, not 1 year ago even, I think we had Mastodon, which was kind of thought to be taking over. That didn't quite happen. But let's see where it's going. I don't have the crystal ball. But again, for those who work in communication and don't really know where to go, I think it always starts from the question, where is my audience? Where are my stakeholders? Are they moving somewhere else? Then you should probably move with them. And there is no one day where you can say, okay, now we're good and we're not going to change. No, that there needs to be this constant kind of mapping and assessment of everything, including your digital tools, to see where you should be next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what we've seen also in Brussels is that it takes time. There's a slow pace to adopting new changes as well. Even with Twitter, in the past, there was reluctance to go on the platform, right? And see that I call it Twitter. And I want to make a shout out as well to Irem here that also mentioned, that it's really interesting to see how many people are still antagonizing X, but they're still very much on there. And she's also sharing this comment from X.
Yeah.
Yes. And Danielle also.
Yeah, I mean, no, perhaps just one thought on that. I think that basically goes to the point of be attentive to where your audience is going. That's your they are your key focus as a communicator is the people and the stakeholders that you are communicating to, whether those are MEPs, whether those are commission officials or private companies or trade associations or donors or whoever that might be. If your audience is in some platform rather than the other, or if they're on the move, then you should be attentive and you should be mapping those trends. And really agree with Daniel when he says that we can't put all the eggs on one basket. That's true. One caveat there is about resources, human resources especially. I would say how many eggs you have also depends on how much money you have to buy eggs. I mean, it's a more or less, perhaps not such a good metaphor, but if you don't have the team size to manage multiple platforms, then it's probably not worth to having so many. It's better to have one or two platforms that you manage well and that you follow regularly than to expand beyond what you can chew, and then there are things that you miss, and then you're unable to sort of follow your audience. So that's the one caveat I would make. But it's as a strategy or a tactics, I agree with that too.
Yes, absolutely. And actually this even, I think, links very well with the potential of the Fediverse. And I know that obviously we still need to see, what benefits we can reap in the short term. I think practically speaking, obviously it will take time, although some platforms are now exploring its potential, like Threads' integration with the Fediverse. Being able to cross-share between platforms can actually help with this resource gap or resource constraints that some potential clients or stakeholders can have, because you can easily just, with investing in one piece of content, also share it across multiple platforms, if that, of course, is a potential availability. But we need to see how this evolves as well. I think there's a lot of promise into it. It's not something new, but it's something that is yet to be more practically implemented. And I think right now it's all a bit too technical and confusing for many people. So we need to also make it a bit more simple and applicable and accessible to the wider audience to, I think, really see the potential benefits of this becoming a reality.
I agree.
Yeah, and I would say keep experimenting. Sorry, Evelyn, go ahead.
No, of course. I agree with Marcela. It's exactly what I wanted to say as well. Keep experimenting. And I think it's very also important to kind of like acknowledge, on what platform we're posting, what type of content. And I think, it is important that at this point that we don't have, a brand new exciting platform, that we do leverage what we do have available, and basically, leverage for the best use, so that we can draft a very good strategy. Because I think that what we've seen, especially in the past year, is that effective communication is also to make sure that the channels that you're present are kept quite informed, that you're sharing all the information on a timely manner, and you don't just focus on only one channel to gain some momentum. And based on that, I wanted to also ask you, Joao, how, personally, and if you're from your past experience, how do you measure and evaluate the effectiveness of communication strategies that you have applied, particularly when it comes to contributing and fostering peace and development, which is something that you have, heavily done on your background?
Yeah. Wow, could it be more difficult as a question? Again, I go back to a point that I said earlier. Communication is really a human and social activity, and so it's hard to be successful, and it's hard to identify success. Because when you're talking about communication, whether you're talking about communication for development, policy communication, you're really talking about having an impact. And having an impact means, achieving a certain outcome, whether that is a change of behavior, that's communication for behavioral change, meaning that someone in a certain community or someone in a city or in a specific geographic area will adopt a different behavior that they did not have before because of what you communicated, or in perhaps more Brussels lingo, a policymaker is going to vote in one direction or the other in relation to a specific policy file, or a specific initiative is going to be launched. Or a donor is going to commit some funding to your project or to your organization if you work in an NGO. So, impact is in the end, it's the outcome, right? But the outcome is really difficult to achieve. And there are many things, in fact, that escape your control as a communicator, which can impact the outcome, right? And the more we're talking about peace and development, the more that outcome escapes your control, the more external variables can impact whatever it is that you're doing. What I would say is, you have to be mindful of this, first of all. And so obviously outcomes need to be measured. You communicate because of a certain reason, because you want to achieve certain things, you want to achieve some action in the real world. And so the outcomes do matter. And so you need to measure those. How did this activity contribute to a certain outcome? How much of that outcome did we achieve? Was it, full funding? If we're talking about funding, was it X% of people who adopted a different behavior? How different, what kind of an outcome did we achieve? But I also think we deserve, and also because, let's talk about the real, one of the issues as well. It's not the only issue, but it's one of the issues. When we're measuring the impact of a communication strategy, our role or our job is also on the line, right? In essence, we are evaluating ourselves as well as our team. So I think it's important also to measure outputs and to measure KPIs and to measure everything that you can measure, not just to say, okay, this was a clear victory or a clear failure, trying to see how much of a victory and how much of a failure that was, but also trying to measure what were the steps that you took to get to the point where you were. Because that is, in the end, what is going to allow you to say, okay, the strategy was good because of this reason. We did this activity or this initiative. That was a good idea, but perhaps other activities were not such a good idea. And that's how you can tweak and make sure that you are improving your strategy and are, going to do better next year, whether you're working in policy communication or in communication for development or whatever goal you're trying to achieve with your communication. But it's one of the hardest things I find in when you're communicating or when you're doing public affairs, for that matter. And people oftentimes don't feel so comfortable doing it. And many of the people I speak with, it's a challenge for them. But in the end, I think there's comfort also in the sense that everybody feels a little bit uncomfortable about this. And so it's a matter of us continue talking to each other, learning from each other, how different people do certain things, have this peer-to-peer learning opportunities, and try to do it better every time.
Yes, definitely. I do agree with you. I think the most important part, one of the most important parts of a project, especially for us, is also the wrap up of a project, because you do get to kind of consider and think about the learnings, but also, evaluate the techniques that you have used, the approach that you have used. So I think, this facilitates indeed as experience and knowledge, for the next time that you're going to do something similar or something, that is different, but you do have, a knowledge of how you can can build up the strategy for it. Yes, totally on the same page with you. I think that we can maybe pass to recommendations, because I'm looking forward to hear what you are recommending for this week.
So let's hit that jingle.
Yes. Perfect.
That was nice.
I'm going to ask for Joao to talk about his recommendations, since you're our invitee this week. So feel free to go ahead.
Okay, so recommendations, you mean books or podcasts or things that are across my radar? Okay, so well, I thought I'd just mention the book that I just finished, which is called 2054 by Ackerman and Jim Stavridis. Jim Stavridis is the former, I think he's the Supreme Allied Commander for all NATO troops in Europe. He did that role about 10 years ago. Then he went to the academic path. He was the dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. That's where I met him and interacted a bit with him. But he's a very, very good thinker, I think, and very informed about geopolitical issues, as I think you would expect from an admiral and a PhD in international affairs. This book is fiction, but if you're a bit of a nerd for geopolitics and for tech, I think this book will fulfill your desire for a nice read. It's a fiction, as I said. It takes place in the year 2054. I'm not going to say anything else about it, so that people are encouraged to read. But it's a novel that involves AI, genetic transformations, superhuman capabilities, and where is our politics and society heading. So I really enjoyed it. Wow. So there you are. By the way, if you like, there's another book I could recommend, which is one by Ian Bremmer called The Power of Crisis. That's not a fiction, and I think you all know Ian Bremmer. The book came out last year, I think. It's also a very interesting read, slightly depressing, but very realistic. And I also enjoy Ian Bremmer as a thinker. I think he's a very informed and clear thinker. Lastly, perhaps speaking about podcasts, I do think it's very important that we learn every day, if possible, about AI. It's no longer a trend. It's here, and it's going to be here. It's part of the reality, I think. And so I think, especially in our role as communicators or public affairs professionals, we need to be informed about its dangers, about the opportunities, about how to work with it. And so I follow a podcast called The AI Breakdown. And it has a new episode every couple of days, and it's very good to keep up to date with the developments in that world. And then beyond that, I just like to listen to the Economist every week. They have an audio version. It's not a podcast, but I find it super helpful when I'm commuting, when I'm in my car, and I'm coming back home or I'm going somewhere. I just put it on, and it's really interesting and informative. So that's part of my weekly habits.
Great. Yes,
for me, it's the BBC podcast.
Yeah, that's a nice one too.
Exactly. I wanted to go to you, Marcela, because I know that you also have a podcast recommendation, but just wanted to point out that I think, audiobooks are living, their momentum. I think podcasts, have gained their momentum right after COVID, and, we've seen a lot of growth, and vidcasts as well. But now I think, there is the audiobook, the period, let's say, that is more, intensified. Marcela?
For sure. And I think, I will probably be the first one to always give a podcast recommendation. That's my go-to for every Zeta Life episode. And this time we're giving a shout out to Not Another Marketing Podcast by John Tromans. So in this podcast, there's a lot of interesting episodes, I think, in all things digital, when we talk about content marketing, SEO, blogging, social media, email marketing, really, I think a very diverse portfolio in terms of what is applicable also to small businesses, but not only. I think there's a lot of interesting food for thought in there in every individual episode. on interesting insights that you can take into account when you're developing your own strategy. And I think it's important because there's so many updates, of course, happening in the digital world that we try and get as much information as possible on all of the latest updates to be able to adjust accordingly and adapt our strategies. Also with AI, because I think, Joao, as you rightfully said, there's so many developments happening in this field. I want to say daily, really. That, of course, we at Z10 as well are very much focusing on observing, exploring a lot of the, not just on a content level, but on more practical uses as well, either for the Z10 channels, but also for our clients. We are seeing how best to integrate AI because I think it's inevitable. And if you're not using it, then you're really going to be one of those left behind, because at one point, I think you said, yes, it's not just a trend anymore. But I have to say that I think a lot of people still see it as such. I think the notion is there that it shouldn't just be a trend that you need to embrace it. But I think you'd be surprised to see how many, well, maybe not you per se, but a lot of people would be surprised to see that a lot of people are not using it properly or are even afraid to fully embrace it. So that's something I think that is really important to keep in mind. Anyway, I don't want to ramble on. Evie, to you.
Yes, no, I totally agree, because these were my exact thoughts when Joao spoke about the AI podcast. I know, in fact, it's like a lot of people are a bit, like frightened and scared to try it out on, it's like they have, like the idea that it's going to replace, like them, or, like what they're doing. I don't think that's the case. I think, like we should always be there to feed, like this tool, and we should see it as a tool. Coming to what we said about audiobooks, Irem has a comment and says, I can't wait for Spotify to launch audiobooks in Europe too. They did this in the US, and I totally agree with that. I mean, it would be great. And coming to the final recommendation, which is actually my recommendation, it's the first time that I'm introducing a podcast. I think, it's like it's ZN Live. But recently I got, someone suggested the Girls in Marketing podcast because of the fact that it's, like light and breezy. I have gone through a couple of episodes. They have guests, and they basically cover tips and tricks to help marketeers get started in the marketing industry, but also discuss digital marketing, news, and also expert advice on marketing for marketing professionals. So I think, it's like it's very light hearted, it's informative, but yet breezy. And I think, it's like you can definitely listen it, especially when doing chores, which is usually the time that I listen to my podcasts. So with that, I think we've wrapped up our recommendations.
We have. Although I do want to make a very quick note,
Yes.
And this is just a reminder that next week, we have the Beer and Politics event by Harold, which we're hosting in our offices. It's on the topic of your election on the 17th of April. So just giving a shout out there, still some time to sign up. And we're very happy to support and to host this as best as we can. So on that note, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. Joao, also thank you for all of your expert advice and insights. Thanks a lot for all of the comments and engagements, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Bye.